that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Harvey, and this is Tom Fennell, and we are here to present.
Raised the wrong hand again.
We're here to give you a presentation of Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Fennell. Who are they?
It's funny looking at a screen and thinking you're looking at a mirror.
Yeah, because it's always backwards. Okay. And anybody who doesn't believe us can come into BCTV, sit in the studio, and try it out on its own show, if you can arrange that. Every day I go and find the news on energy and climate change, and we get together and present it in here for you all. And so we've got a week's worth of news starting on Thursday, May 7th, and I guess we'll just go.
Here we go.
Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, said countries are ahead of schedule in negotiating a global agreement on curbing greenhouse gases that can be adopted at the Paris Summit in December. Technology has changed things since a similar effort failed in 2009. I took that from the Chippewa Herald, but it was everywhere.
I didn't have any trouble this week taking down some.
You know what I've been doing is I've been double checking the links and making sure that they'd function.
It wasn't that the links weren't functioning.
Oh.
It was that the site, the host, wanted money or my firstborn child or something like that.
Something like that. Well, what I found out was if I go there and take the URL and put it on my blog, sometimes it'll block that or it'll say I want money. Where if I click on the Google link, it will go to it because it knows that it's coming from Google. So what I'm doing is double checking and putting in the Google link. I'm sure that everybody would want that anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, including the people who want the money for the subscriptions because they need the exposure to potential customers. Okay.
I think what's happening is these guys are putting up a free blog or a free website till they have enough interest.
Yeah.
And then they open it up and say, okay, well,
yeah,
we want your money now.
Okay, that was from the Chippewa Herald. Our next one comes from Energy Matters. Hawaii looks to be set to be the first U.S. state to put a firm use-by date on carbon-intensive energy generation. The new compromise bill sets targets of 30% renewables by 2020, 70% by 2030, and 100% by 2045. It passed the legislature and is now awaiting the governor's signature.
That's David Ige.
Ige, is that
Ige, I looked that one up.
Good for you. I was a little afraid to say it. I would have said Ige. But they had two bills, one in the Senate, one in the House. I forget which was which. I think it was the House bill. They wanted 100% by 2040, and the Senate wanted 100% by 2050, so they compromised.
So they compromised on 2045.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense for Hawaii because they have virtually no fossil fuels. So everything they use, they have to import.
Yeah.
And importing the sun is cheaper than importing oil.
Absolutely it is. Yes, indeed. And as a matter of fact, I want to tell everybody, we're going to have two shows this week. The other show is about microgrids. And one of the things about microgrids is they work really, really well on islands.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
and
yeah.
We're going to have a couple of good pictures of microgrids on islands.
Well, part of what we're going to be talking today is microgrids.
Yeah.
And it's the coming thing.
It is indeed, I think.
And I'm not letting the cat out of the bag. There's already some people in Brattleboro talking about microgrid.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah.
Including me. And you.
Well, the way Brattleboro is wired, it makes sense to have not one but two.
Two, right.
One in the north at the end of town, one in the south, both centered around a major switch yard.
Yes.
There's a switch yard, you can see it on Cotton Mill Hill.
Right.
And the other switch yard is up near the marina on
right. Although
Putney Road.
You can have microgrids within microgrids, as you know. And
Microgrids.
That's
I mean,
right. We've already got.
Right now, I believe the retreat is effectively its own microgrid.
And I believe the hospital is, and as a matter of fact, the building you live in is, I believe.
Not really. It doesn't have enough standby power.
Okay,
It's got enough to run the elevators and keep the hall lights on,
okay.
but that's it.
Uh,
But that's enough. In an emergency, we can get out.
Yeah, well, that's helpful, to be able to get out in an emergency.
Well, I think somebody was thinking about that back in 1960.
Okay.
Moving along.
Our next item is from Clean Technica, this on Friday, May 8th. For the first time, the global average concentration of carbon dioxide has surpassed 400 parts per million for an entire month. NOAA's lead greenhouse gas scientist pointed out that humans burning fossil fuel have caused global carbon dioxide levels to raise more than 120 parts per million since pre-industrial times, with half of that since 1980. And that, as I said, from Clean Technica. What have you got there for a picture? I can't see it because I don't know.
It's just a picture of a guy sampling air.
A guy sampling air, you can do that with your nose.
He's getting the numbers. You can't do that with your nose.
I suppose you can. Okay.
He's from NOAA, by the way.
He's from NOAA. I thought you were going to say he's from Norway or something.
NOAA.
Okay, our next item also comes from Clean Technica, as does the one after. Unconventional drilling, which is to say fracking, creates a huge amount of waste, some of which is sprayed onto farmers' field. Do you have the picture of that? There is a
Yeah, I do.
There is a
right
picture of fracking fluids being sprayed on fields, and we're expected to eat the stuff that's grown in those fields. The most economical disposal method is to dump the waste on agricultural land. This includes grasslands where animals graze and croplands. The waste is also spread into water, which means somebody's dumping it into streams and rivers, and they refuse to tell anybody what it is.
Well, it's proprietary. Why should Macy's tell Gimbels?
Yeah, right. Well, actually, there was a state, and I forget which one it was, but it was not Vermont, I can tell you that, where there was a proposed law that would make it a felony to reveal what fracking companies were using that they were putting underground. Who are these laws for? Are they to protect?
Oh, they're to protect all of us. Yes. Take a look at those pictures there.
Yeah.
The rather dark one is a truck, a machine spreading this stuff.
Yes.
And the one right under it on the left is the effect, and then the one on the right is the edge of that particular field, and it's seeping over into the valley. And what this thing is saying is cows grazing on, they call them dump farms. The cows have elevated levels of hydrocarbons because they're eating this stuff. And we eat the cows.
And we drink their milk.
And well, in this particular case, I think they're beef cattle.
Yeah.
Cows are allowed to graze on land with high levels of hydrocarbons without any punishment. Why punish the cows? And their food products are allowed to go to market without government testing.
Okay.
We are eating the waste from drilling and fracking. Well, that makes sense.
Which they won't tell us what it is.
Which they won't tell us.
Okay. So, moving on. Clean Technica, still on May 8th. Germany's anticipated installation figures for offshore wind this year are 2,071 megawatts, nearly 4 times the country's 529 megawatts installed during 2014.
So this is what they're installing, what they did last year, and what they proposed to install.
They're going to install 4 times as much this year as last year. It's growing a little rapidly, yes. The report details global quarterly intake for wind turbines, both onshore and offshore. And again, we have to talk about the capacity factor. 2,071 megawatts of offshore wind capacity is probably at this point a little more than 1,000 megawatts of nuclear.
Yeah, because the wind isn't always blowing.
Not always blowing, but they've got up to a capacity factor of 50%.
They're pretty high up here in the North Sea, though.
They are. They're very, very high, and the turbines are getting more and more efficient. in harvesting the wind, and so I'm seeing capacity factors that are upwards of 50% in in individual turbines. And
I think that's conservative.
yeah, it is actually. Yeah, these are reported figures. Okay, next from Bloomberg, our favorite non-Clean
Bloomberg
Technica news source.
Mr. Wall
Italy's
Street.
biggest utility will invest 27% more in renewable energy in years ahead, even as a slump in oil prices makes it more difficult for wind and solar to compete with fossil fuels on price. I don't think that's really true. I think the slump in oil prices is having almost no effect because oil doesn't generate much power. NL Green Power SPA plans to increase annual capital spending to 2.1 billion euros through 2017, up from 1.66 in 2014. I don't remember what a euro is, but I think it's about $1.20.
It's very close to $1 now.
Is it?
Yeah, $1 and a nickel or something like that.
Really?
$1.07. Yeah.
So it's these figures. If you just gave them dollar figures,
You'd be close enough
you'd be a little bit low, but not terribly low.
Good enough for horseshoes.
I think so. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that would work. If somebody gave me 2.1 billion, I'd give them plenty of horseshoes back. Remember that, folks. Anybody who wants horseshoes, just give me lots of money.
Interesting takeaway from this,
Yeah.
and it's logical, but you don't think about it. It's pretty incredible to see how once the power arrives, and he's talking about the third world here.
Yeah.
It creates wealth. There was no bakery, and suddenly there is because they can have the power to open one.
Yes.
My impression is this is going to happen more and more often all over the world.
Oh, I think it is.
And
Absolutely.
He's right on the money.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Saturday, May 9th, a new study in Nature Climate Change says that utility-scale solar plants taking up massive amounts of open space in the countryside aren't necessary. We can get more than enough solar power by building in cities instead. The study focuses on California because it is pursuing renewable goals. This is from Coexist. And you know, this is backwards from what the US DOE has said for some states in the United States. If we developed all the solar that we could in cities on rooftops in Vermont, it would not give us the power that we are currently using. That's what the DOE has said.
No, in cities and rooftops?
Cities,
Or all rooftops?
all rooftops that are where
Throughout the state?
Throughout the state, where there is a good solar source there, and yards too, as a matter of fact, and in places in cities like above sidewalks and parking lots and things like that.
That surprises me.
They actually gave the figures a couple of years ago, and I think it was not as much as 60% of what we need, but. Again, you've got to remember, that is just solar in just those places. It doesn't count other places there's solar. It doesn't count hydro. It doesn't count wind. You know, so it would be a resource that we could really develop, for sure.
Well, this particular article refers to California.
Yes.
And they have vast deserts that, we'll touch base on that.
Yeah.
Some of them have been disturbed.
And
Doesn't
some
be a
have not.
problem. Some of them are pristine, and
Yep.
I've been to Death Valley. I mean, it's gorgeous.
And you survived?
Well, I was in an air-conditioned car
Aha!
in October, so it doesn't get too.
Okay.
But yeah, I can see why you want to preserve places like that.
Yes.
But there are other places that aren't
Yep.
worth preserving. Well, we'll get to that.
Yep. Every time I see Arizona highways, I think, wow, is that
That's a nice
beautiful?
magazine,
I am
isn't it?
so glad I'm not there. I sunburned too badly to go to Arizona and get out and see all that stuff, but it's beautiful. Our next item comes from the Kitsap Sun. A massive solar expansion, global expansion of solar power, possibly enough to supply about a third or more of the world's electricity, may be necessary by 2050 to reduce the impacts of fossil fuels on the climate, according to a report published by MIT. But that means increasing solar from today's 20 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts in the U.S. Now, I got to tell you, I'm not worried about that because we're going to do that. It just makes
It's just going to happen because
just
it's
gonna happen.
economic sense.
It's economic sense.
Interesting thing here is I didn't realize this, but what this particular author is focusing on is a tax credit rewards the building of solar farms, adding capacity, more than it helps the actual generation of electricity.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, there's a link there. You build a farm,
Right.
you're going to get more. But the way they're giving the tax credit, it provides money to the guy who's building a farm more than the guy who owns it and selling electricity to the grid for years down the line.
Interesting. Of course, there's one thing to bear in mind about the guy who's selling electricity to the grid down the line, and that is that once his investment is paid off, it costs
It's
very,
free.
very little.
It's free.
He's just collecting the sunshine.
Yeah, they're tying these contracts into the projected life of the solar panels.
Which is short.
And the projected life of the solar panel seems to be exceeding greatly the
Oh,
real
yeah.
life much more
Is greater.
greatly than the projections.
The estimates that I've seen is the projections are saying 20 years or something like that, and I read things from people saying, well, 50 years is probably more reasonable.
I think you're right.
And some of them will probably be still going 100 years down the road, because there's no moving parts, there's very little degradation, and trees fall on solar panels pretty seldom because they're put up in places where there aren't trees. Okay. Oil Voice tells us the UK Prime Minister Cameron's 2014 commitment to go, quote, all out for shale gas, end quote, may have been controversial, but now he has secured power, and by which they mean his party won a clean majority in Parliament. This could be
kind of surprised everybody, didn't they?
should be huge news for the oil and gas company in the UK. Estimates suggest up to £6 billion, that is money, of shale gas annually could be produced in Lancashire for the next 3 decades. Lancashire! Oh my gosh.
I haven't
That's
enough.
one county.
Yeah. I haven't enough knowledge of British
Well-
geography for that to mean anything to me. I don't even know where Lancashire is.
It's in England. That's really, there are cities, and it's kind of like, it's like the rest of the UK. It's heavily populated because the entire UK is heavily populated, except for Cornwall and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. I guess Northern Ireland's heavily populated.
It's pretty. Yeah,
They've got a
Belfast
lot
is
of
pretty-
population,
pretty
and no matter where you go, there's a lot of people, and that fracking is going to be done under people, and they're going to find out why the people in Oklahoma have earthquakes and why the people in British Columbia have got and Pennsylvania have got wells going bad. Okay, Sunday.
I wonder
May
what
10th.
Mr. Cameron was doing in that particular picture there.
What was he doing?
He's making a point. That's
It
for
looks
sure.
like he's poking an arrow, a hole in the air, which politicians in general, I think,
They do
are very
that, don't
good
they?
at
Yeah.
poking holes in the air. Okay, Sunday, May 10th, from Herald, Scotland, the first renewable energy scheme in Scotland to draw heat from the sea. Could be
This is
installed in
interesting.
Shetland.
Yeah, this is interesting.
It is. The archipelago's capital of Lerwick already has the largest district heating system in Scotland, heated by burning trash. But there isn't enough trash to burn, so they are considering an ocean source heat pump. And
So the
by
nice
golly,
thing about heat pumps is they can find heat where we wouldn't even think it was there.
you know one thing for sure, and that is off the coast of Scotland, you go down to the bottom of the ocean and the temperature is going to be 37 degrees.
Pretty much all year
Fahrenheit.
round. Yeah.
All year
Yeah,
round,
yeah.
all the time, because
Yeah.
that's the temperature at which water is densest.
Okay.
So water's weird. As it cools off from room temperature, 100 degrees, whatever, it contracts just like most metals do. But when it hits 37 degrees, as it cools, it starts to expand. So that means the densest water is 37 degrees. And unless there's something funny going on, like a volcanic vent or something, the lowest point in any large body of water is going to be that temperature. And it makes, it's one of the things that makes it really predictable that you can get heat from the ocean when you put the cold down at the bottom of the ocean and you take the heat out and put it into people's houses. It means that the colder water that you've created around your heat heat exchanger rises.
Okay.
So it sucks in more 37-degree
Yeah,
water.
It's always 37.
Always 37. Okay, from CNN. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the Dallas area has suffered almost 40 small earthquakes, magnitude 2.0 or higher, since the beginning of the year. The latest, a magnitude 2.7 quake near Farmers Branch on Saturday. That was the preceding Saturday.
That's a nice section of Dallas.
I've never been there.
Yeah, Farmers Branch, it's nice.
There was only one in the 58 years before 2008, and the difference is due probably to fracking. And by the way, Oklahoma is experiencing more earthquakes than California. Oklahoma, a smaller state in the Midwest where people don't have earthquakes.
They don't have earthquakes there.
They do now
Yeah,
because they've been fracking.
Because they've been fracking. But they're small earthquakes.
They're small earthquakes, yeah. They only knock people's chimneys down. They don't knock down entire freeways.
I got about 4 pictures from this particular article, so I'm going to put them up on the screen in a second.
Good.
There's one picture on the right of the guy lighting water.
Oh, goody. Everybody should be able to light the water that comes out of his tap. That way they can heat their house for free.
Up on the left is a sign that popped up overnight. Thou shalt not frack with our water. Amen.
Yeah, right.
And in the lower 2 pictures are pictures of the actual fracking process. I have no idea what's going on, but
they make a mess. That's what's going on.
Huh?
They're making a mess. That's what's going on.
Well, it's pretty quiet here. They're not leaking.
Yeah.
But they're taking the contents of about 6 different tanks and putting them in what is obviously what they're pumping down under the ground. And on the left is a whole bunch of oil pumps.
Yep.
Well, we'll move along.
Moving along. Okay. Monday, April 11th, Apple announced expansion of its renewable energy and environmental protection initiatives in China, including a multi-year project with a World Wildlife Fund to increase responsibly managed forests significantly. The newest forest land programs aim to protect as much as 1 million acres. This from the Financial.
Apple seems to have their act together in this case.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be talking about that a little bit later on.
Yeah, they're really pushing on this.
Interesting picture. This came from the article.
Yep.
And it's solar, but it's not solar photovoltaic.
Yes, that's right. It's not.
It looks like, well, those are little concave mirrors.
That's right.
They're focusing the sun's energy
Yep.
on what is probably a glass tube that we can't see in this picture.
Yep.
And there's a liquid in that tube, probably some sort of water.
Yep.
Maybe not, but they're capturing the heat from that. So there are many options for solar.
There are many options. I had a friend who built a thing like that, kind of homemade. I guess it was about 1975. He was thinking, what a good way to do things. You know, the thing doesn't have to track. All we have to do is just kind of aim it at the general position of the sun.
Well, it stays there.
It stays there. And what he found was that it heated the water in the pipe that he put across so fast that he realized very quickly he would not be able to control it. And so he gave up on it because it was too powerful. And it was just a little trough that he made at home.
Okay, I can see that happening. He could have improved it by running the water through it faster or something.
Yeah, he could have,
like
but he realized that he needed to get some
He needed some kind of a pump.
and mechanism for he needed to have controls that would measure the temperature and a whole bunch of things. So he decided that it would be really important to do that, and without the ability to do it, he'd probably best just give up, which is what he did. Okay, our next item is from Sun and Wind Energy. The Swiss battery manufacturer, how do you pronounce that, Tom? Leclanche has received an, I can pronounce Welsh, but I can't pronounce French.
Well, there's a little line over the E.
There's a little line over the E.
They even got a name for that. I don't know what it is, but
it's an acute or a grave, and I don't know which.
Yeah, something like that.
It has received an order from Unicos AG to build a turnkey battery power plant in the Azores island of Graciosa,
I think this picture is Graciosa.
Yeah, it is.
Whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's a pretty spot.
The storage system will be part of a microgrid solution which will increase the proportion of renewable energies used on the island from 15% to 65%.
So here we are with microgrids on islands again.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is going to be very important for the island because, you know, those islands, with very few exceptions, they have to import all their power, and moving from 15% to 65%.
It's significant.
Significant difference.
Significant.
These islands are where people burn oil.
Yeah, yeah.
And
You mean to make power?
to make power, yeah. Okay, Clean Technica tells us, building off a strong January and February, new electric generation capacity added in the USA in March brought the first quarter split to 84% for renewables, 81% for solar and wind, leaving 16% for everything else, which in this case is probably entirely natural gas.
This is the new stuff. This is what's being built.
This is what's being built. Utility scale solar now accounts for 1% of total U.S. electric generation capacity, and small scale solar an estimated 0.7%. What Clean Technica is saying here is that we're pushing on 2% solar power, and I got news for you. We were already at 1% in December, and solar is growing so fast that it may be 1.3% by now. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think we may be over 2% of our capacity from solar, which is not to say that 2.2% of our electricity comes from solar, because it doesn't. But it does say that 2% of our capacity might. Okay, Tuesday, May 12th. A race is on to harness tides and waves for electric power, with more than 100 different devices being tested by companies hoping to make a commercial breakthrough. The UK, Ireland, France, Portugal, Spain, Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, they're all developing technologies to harvest the tide, we are told by ecobusiness.com.
And we are too here.
We are too, absolutely. Yeah. Everybody's trying to harvest the tide. And for good reason. There's a lot of power in the tide.
No, I think we talked about the Maine Canada border,
Yes.
where they have some of the highest tides in the world.
Right. This is the Bay of Fundy.
Bay of Fundy, yep.
And actually, I believe they do have the highest tides in the
They
world.
do,
There's
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of power going in and out. You know, it'd be interesting just for fun to figure out how much water goes in and out of the Bay of Fundy every day,
I'm sure somebody knows that number.
and how much power you could get from that water if you could get all the power
Yeah,
from it.
yeah.
I bet it's as much power as everybody on Earth needs, or more.
This picture is something we've talked about before. That's the area of Swansea.
Yes.
And that's not a photograph. That's not a photograph, it's an artist's rendition.
That's an artist's rendering, yeah.
And we did see another artist's rendition of the same project from a different
Right,
view.
right.
And they're great, they're just creating an isolated section of the sea that's controllable. It fills up in a day, or fills up when the tide's coming in,
Right.
empties out when the tide's going
Right.
out, back and forth,
Back and forth. No matter which way the water's moving, if it's moving, you're getting
making some
power.
power.
Yeah.
And it
And-
looks like they're going to have some amenities there. This is just an artist's conception, but we saw from the other picture, you know,
Yeah.
it's a bikeway and a walkway, but not a carway.
Yes.
And looked like a nice way to spend the summer afternoon.
Yep. This is on the Severn estuary, which is between Wales and the area of England of Somerset, Devon. And that is another place like the Bay of Fundy where there's a lot of motion in the water with the tide.
Yeah. Is that also called Bristol Bay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
I'm
I'm getting a little bit better about my.
yeah.
Now, the article talked about different techniques that they're using to
Yep.
capture this tide.
Yes.
And the first one, they've been using it for a long, long time. They call it a barrage across a river. It's basically a dam,
Yes.
okay? And the river has to be a tidal river.
Now, I actually looked up the word barrage.
So did I.
Did you really? And you know, believe it or not, the reason why we call an artillery barrage is because it's something that blocks people from moving.
Okay.
as these
That's
barrages
what these are doing. Yeah.
bar things, they bar water from
they
moving.
bar
It's
water.
basically just a big dam.
The second one is what we just talked about, a tidal lagoon. That's what's
Right.
going on in Swansea.
Yep.
Okay, and the third one, we've looked at these things, very interesting.
Yep.
Underwater turbines.
Yes.
Okay, and,
Yep.
and it says, and this one's new to me, a new generation of devices not placed on the seabed, but either floating like kites on a string or operating from platforms.
Yes.
I haven't seen any of this
Now,
technology.
you know, there's another thing that's interesting about this, and that is we've talked about that the water moves in and the water moves out. And whenever the water is moving, you can have electric generated.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another thing to bear in mind, and that is by regulating things carefully, you can have an area where you're always generating electricity, regardless of whether the tide is moving or not. And the way you do that is when the tide comes in, it's high. And if you've got a barricaded area that no water has gone into yet, you can open up the gates to that, and when the tide is high, that's when you get the water coming out, the electricity.
Okay, it's
and
like, sort of like pump storage, isn't it?
Right, and then as the tide goes down, you shut that off.
Yeah.
You, when it's been filled,
Yeah.
you know, you fill it very quickly, and then when the tide is down, then you can let it come back out again.
Yeah.
So you can actually generate power from these things 24/7.
So it's like a built-in battery.
It's like a built-in
Yeah.
battery. Yeah, it's interesting. There's
some smart people thinking about some smart things.
I got kidneys. Okay. Our next item. Let's see. What is our? Oh yes, Scotland. Renewables are important, but there are more coming. By the middle of 2014, they were already bigger than nuclear, and I should say much bigger than nuclear, probably 150% of nuclear. The country's second resource capacity was 7,112 megawatts by the end of the third quarter. Wind alone has 8,161 megawatts of capacity in various stages of construction and another 3,765 megawatts in planning. Now, what this tells us is, as much as they've got in wind, they've got 150% more coming.
Yeah, and it's still a drop in the bucket.
Except for one thing, and that is, it may be a drop in the bucket
Now.
of what they can get eventually.
Yeah.
But they're already getting.
They're doing
They're
pretty
getting
well.
like 40%, 45% in Scotland from renewables. It's a lot.
I think, well, they're generating more capacity than they're using now. They're exporting it to England.
They are generating more capacity, but some of that is nuclear, and in fact, they still have some fossil fuel plants there.
Got a couple of graphs up here that show that. The one on the left shows how installed capacity of renewables has been growing, and it's a steady increase.
Yep.
And then on the right, they break it down by the type of energy.
The type.
And the green one there, that's most of them, is onshore wind.
Onshore
Not
wind.
offshore, but onshore.
Onshore wind is very big in Scotland, and as a matter of fact, our not our next item, but the one after that has to deal with UK renewable power, and the people in Scotland have got an enormous amount, and the UK as a whole is taking credit.
But it's interesting. This is installed capacity right now, and onshore wind is 3/4 of it.
Yep.
And hydro is 1/4.
Yeah.
Almost everything else is negligible.
Yes.
At least in this particular.
Yes. Okay, that was from Clean Technica. Now our next one from Utility Dive. Iowa's 5,688 megawatts of installed wind capacity uses only 1% of the state's wind resources, according to a new report, Iowa Wind Potential for Addressing 111D Goals. The resources are
1%.
1%.
Wow.
The resources are more than adequate to meet the state's clean power plan requirements cost effectively and help neighboring states too. Now, you know, it's interesting because I don't know, but I think Iowa might actually have enough wind power to power the entire United States.
Well, according to this article, they got a lot more than their neighboring states. For some
Huge
reason,
amount.
yeah.
Huge amount. I guess Texas has more than enough to. Texas
It
is
could
big, though.
generate 2 million gigawatt hours.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
2 million.
Where does the money come from when people put that up? And you know, I mean, if you had a wind farm in your backyard, and even if a big company came in and collected the money from that, they would be paying you royalties on the use of your land.
Yeah, they would.
And I'll tell you, I would much rather live in a wind farm than in an oil field.
Duh.
There are probably people out there watching this who are saying, "Ooh, what a crazy person." There are people in the United States who do live in wind farms.
Oh yeah, we will see them in the slideshow.
In the slideshow, which, by the way, is going to be on Channel 8, I believe, throughout the week.
Well, I don't know yet, but I
believe
think it
that's
will
what it
be
is.
as a separate
It's a separate show. BCTV will have it on.
And maybe we can tell them, well, at least some of those times, why don't you have it follow this show?
Right. The Roscoe Wind Farm is 100,000 acres almost. It has 638 turbines, as I recall. I might be wrong. 634. But it has 400 people who own property. And they live in the wind farm, and they have schools in the wind farm, and they have churches in the wind farm, and they live in the wind farm, and it's probably nowhere near as noisy as Elliott Street.
I can guarantee you it's not.
I've been waked up at night by boom cars with my windows rattling, and I can tell you that could happen from thunder, but I doubt it would happen from wind.
Well, I live on the corner of Elliott and Elm.
Yeah.
And it's pretty customary for motorcycles to come up that hill.
Wow.
Then as soon as they turn onto Elliott, they gun it.
Yes.
Round.
Yeah. You did a very quiet round. Okay. Should we go on?
Why not?
We
Why not?
are rapidly coming to the end of the day's materials. Okay, we've got 4 items left. We can spend lots of time talking about these things. Wednesday, May 13th, which is today as we tape this. It is yesterday, but of course as you see it, it won't be yesterday because you won't see it today.
I bet you can't say that again.
I might be able to say something like it, but there's no way I'd be able to make sense of it. The UK's new Conservative Minister for Energy and Climate Change, Amber Rudd, has made her unequivocal backing for action to combat climate change and for the science behind it.
This is interesting.
Yeah.
An interesting development.
This is vital in a year when a major international deal for combating global warming is expected in Paris in December. This is from the New Scientist. And you know, she made a point, and actually that picture on the screen, I think I put a caption on that, and you probably don't
have the caption.
In the caption, it had a quote from her, which said, Margaret Thatcher was the first, read the quote.
I've got that quote. To those who still say that conservatives do not take tackling climate change seriously,
Yep.
let me remind them that it was Margaret Thatcher who was the first ever world leader to sound the alarm on taking action on global warming at the UN in 1989.
Okay. Now, you know, I actually know people who say climate change is an invention by socialists to take over the world.
Absolutely.
And the idea that they have is it's going to cause centralized planning because it's going to force everybody to work on climate change. And you know, it amazes me that they actually tell me that 97% of the scientists who write on climate change are involved in a conspiracy. Why would there be a conspiracy if it's 97%? They could just do it openly and say, we're going to do it. We're going to make the world socialist. But you couldn't, you know, Tom, I would actually bet that if we could somehow get the truth of the picture, we would find that the number of climatologists and meteorologists who are denying climate change is smaller than the percentage of physicists who believe that they, as individuals, are the reincarnation of Isaac Newton.
That's an interesting statistic.
If it's true. But it's practically nobody, and it's a big conspiracy. You know, it's like, Why are we discussing climate change when if you can get that percentage of people to say, yeah, we believe in socialism, all you got to do is have an election.
Yeah.
You don't need to invent climate change for that. And then on top of everything else, centralized planning. Washington is going in for centralized planning. The EPA has told the states to limit emissions. That's centralized planning. The EPA is telling the states how to figure out what to do in terms of the number, but the states can figure out how to do it. That's not centralized planning. Distributed power is distributed. It's not centralized.
Yeah.
Ordinary people can have their own power. That's very democratic. It's not centralized. Now, it may be that if we had a Brattleboro utility, these people would say that's socialism. That's the government owning the means of production. And if that's the case, then fine, I'm a socialist.
Well, there are certain things I think that should be public, and power is certainly becoming as essential almost as water.
You know what I think should be public? The right and the ability of people to decide in their communities what they're going to do.
What to do, yeah.
That's called democracy. And if that's socialism, then fine. I believe in socialism.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
You know, and it's the kind of thing that I think the most conservative Americans should be able to say, yes, that's democracy. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
But instead we've got we've got an organization in the United States which is claiming to be patriotic, and it's claiming to be conservative, and it's claiming to be pro-American, and it's claiming to be dealing with the future, and I'm going to give it a new name. I'm going to call it the Judas Foundation.
Judas?
Judas. Because they're selling out the United States, they're selling out democracy, they're selling it out for short-term gains.
Oh, yeah.
It's the Judas Foundation, and allied with them is the Quisling Fund. Man. Okay, sorry, I've ranted enough.
That was a good rant, yeah.
I hope everybody likes my rant. Okay, now, Greenpeace has released a report naming the tech companies who make the best and worst use of renewable power. The report grades companies on areas including renewable energy commitment, deployment, and advocacy of green power mitigation and transparency of their energy policies, with Apple right at the top and the Judas Foundation right at the bottom. I'm not ranting. This is from the Register, but this also appeared in many places.
They gave Apple good grades, and
Amazon,
Oracle they graded poorly.
Amazon they graded poorly.
And Amazon Web Services was even lower than Oracle.
But Google is very high.
That's not mentioned in this part of the article, but you're right. Yeah. You're right.
There are a bunch of companies that are putting a lot of effort, and of course Apple is right at the very top of the.
And their takeaway, this is Greenpeace speaking, while companies are making efforts to shift their data centers to renewable power sources. And by the way, these data centers use a lot of power.
Use a lot of power. That's right.
More needs to be done in areas such as leaning on local utilities to move from non-renewable power sources.
This is an interesting thing because these big power centers use enormous amounts of power.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, the companies who are putting them up want very much to know that their power prices are not going to be fluctuating.
Yeah, they're not variable.
So they go for power purchase agreements that are long-term and are not dependent on fuel costs.
What might that be?
That means that they are going to be going for wind power and solar power.
Yep, yeah.
And so they can get long-term, in some case 20-year power purchase agreements at reasonable prices. The people who own these companies, that solar and wind companies that are selling power at reasonable prices in power purchase agreements, are actually, a lot of them are being put into what are called yield cos.
What are they?
Yield cos. It's a kind of company where let's just say that you're a big installer, and you install a bunch of wind farms and solar farms and so forth, and you say, I don't want to have everything, I don't want to have all my eggs in one basket. Not only that, but I want to be building new stuff fast, and I don't want to have to be living on my profits. I want to have other money coming in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a wind farm, and then I'm going to sell 49% of it.
Okay.
And I'm going to make a subsidiary that holds the whole thing. I own 51%. 49% is sold to people who put money in.
Just investors.
Just investors. They put money in and they look at this and they say, okay, we're going to make 6% on our income on our investment. They can know in advance what their income is going to be for a very long time because it's very stable.
Yeah.
It's a much more stable investment than the utilities used to be when the utilities were considered stable. And the utilities are no longer stable.
Yeah.
So money is going into these yield codes where a person says 6%. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I could do that. And so that's where a lot of the money is being moved. And the companies like Google and Apple and so forth, they're making kind of they're benefiting from the fact that they can have a stable source of power, and
they can count on it.
They can count on it, and it happens that the most stable source of power is wind and solar.
Yeah.
In the long term, you don't know that the wind is going to be blowing at any given time a week away. You don't know that the sun is. You know that the sun is not going to be shining in the middle of the night. But one thing that you do know is wind and solar farms 20 years from now will not be paying for fuel. That you can bank on.
That you can bank on, and people are doing exactly that.
Yeah, now Tesla's got this battery, so it doesn't matter when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. It's just,
and this is just the first iteration of that battery.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot develop in the next.
There's going to be
50
other
years.
sources. I mean, flow batteries are. We've talked about.
Flow batteries.
We're going to be.
We're going to be seeing a flow battery diagram in our. We're going to be able to talk about it in the slideshow. So we're going to have some fun in that slideshow, and everybody's going to be able to tune in on Channel 8. I'm sure it's going to be on Channel 8, and watch us yammer, laugh, and make fools of ourselves.
The click and clack of energy.
Okay, and by the way, next week we're going to have guests.
Oh, good. Who's going to be here?
A couple of people from Co-op Power in Greenfield, or in Pioneer Valley, which is also Vermont and New Hampshire and so forth.
Okay.
Co-op Power. There's.
I know Co-op Power.
They're in their final push to get $800,000 to assemble all the equipment in their biodiesel plant.
Yeah, biodiesel.
Which they want to get going in the fall. They need to get that money so they can do it.
Yeah.
And if they get it by the 1st of June, then they're getting it in dribs and drabs all over the place. One person offers $25 and another person offers $50. You get enough people doing that, and you've got $800,000. So
this is crowdfunding.
This is crowdfunding of a source,
yeah.
and it's not donations; it's loans.
It's loans.
So
yeah.
It's
like buying stock.
It's kind of like buying stock, but Co-op Power is a.
It's a nonprofit.
It's also cooperatively owned.
Yeah.
And so it's not a standard for-profit organization. And I took a look at what they're going to be doing in terms of the effect to the local economy. They're going to be making at some point 5 million gallons of oil a year.
Okay.
5 million gallons of oil will mean that something on the order of, I'm going to guess $10 million, $7 million, something like that, will not be flowing out of the Greenfield area, Pioneer Valley area economy every year, but will stay in instead. And the effect of keeping that money in that area is huge. It goes way beyond the 14 or so employees that they're going to have in the plant. It goes way beyond the members of the organization. It goes into the whole surrounding community. And it means that what is going to be burned as oil is vegetable oil, which is being used instead of being tossed. And tossed, what does it do? It degrades. And what does it degrade into? The same carbon dioxide that it burns into, plus methane and a bunch of other things you don't want. So Anyway, I've got my opinion about the good and the bad of that, and I'll tell you about it next week.
Is Lynn coming?
Lynn is coming.
Good.
Yeah.
She's knows what she's talking about.
She knows what she's talking about. She is a powerful woman, I think. Okay. Now, yes.
Riverside County.
Riverside County, by golly. The Board of Supervisors of Riverside County, California signed off on a major solar plant, voting unanimously to approve a 485 megawatt, 3,600 acre project near Blythe. And is that the picture that I supplied of Blythe, or is it a different one?
Well,
No, that's not. That's a different picture.
I don't think I've got a picture of Blythe, because Blythe isn't built yet.
No, I had a picture of a plane landing at Blythe Airport, and it's basically a tarmac in the middle of a desert.
I don't even have that.
Huh?
I don't even have that picture.
I didn't provide it to you, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in my blog it's there.
Okay.
But it's the plane is landing in an airport, and it's just sand.
There's nothing there.
There's nothing there, and they are, not only are they using land that has, their land. There's no there, and not only is there no there, but it's disturbed no there. That's.
I wonder what disturbed it.
I don't know. The project on private, previously disturbed land would power about 800,000 homes. 180,000 homes, and add over $500,000 per year to the county's revenues. And this is from
the article dwells on the conflict a little bit. The conservation groups have been opposing this sort of thing because of the effect on wildlife, which is what they're about. I mean, I could see that.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, the land has already been disturbed.
Yes.
Okay, so
I don't know how it's been disturbed.
It's no longer pristine.
Maybe it's the airport.
It could be. I don't know. But I'll read a quick sentence here. The project cleared its biggest hurdle when it won support of environmental groups like Defenders of Wildlife and the Sierra Club,
Yes.
which had been opposing stuff like this,
Yeah.
whose opposition has helped slow or sink other solar farms. The alternatives, and this is a quote, the alternatives to this project do not offer any substantial environmental benefits, largely because of the previously disturbed condition of the majority of the lands within the project site, which makes this a superior site.
Right.
And that's 7 environmental groups who are saying this is the way we got to go. This is better than whatever else might have been planned for the land.
Yeah, when you consider the magnitude of disturbed sites, every municipal waste facility is a disturbed site.
Well, every farm basically is a disturbed
Well, yeah,
site.
every farm is a disturbed site of a sort. You've got the landfills are all disturbed sites.
Oh, absolutely.
But, when I was in the chemical industry, I used to see what are called chemical ponds.
Yeah.
And a chemical pond was a toxic waste dump,
Yep.
which was just sitting there
Just sitting
in the
there.
open. And every once in a while, you'd see a bird land, a duck or something, try to land in one of these things, thinking that it was a pond, and it would land, and then it would die, because the ammonia coming off would overwhelm it. That would be the end of that. And we have a lot of wildlife being killed because of things, paper fibers, leather fibers, and things like that going into rivers. The Ashwillet River, going in through Hinsdale and so forth from Keene. When I was a little kid, that river was very often not majority, but you could always see soapsuds in it. It smelled like effluent from a laundromat, and it was full of toxic materials. There were no fish alive in there. There was nothing really alive in there at all, except for bacteria, as far as I can gather. And we've changed a lot of that, but we've got a lot of places in this world where wind and solar and other things can be put without disturbing valuable resources for as far as wildlife is concerned. And another thing is, if you look at the Cape Wind Project, for example, the Audubon Society has backed the Cape Wind Project because of the number of birds it will save. which is
That's kind
approximately...
of interesting, isn't it? That's the opposite of what sometimes you're hearing.
It's the opposite of what you hear a lot of the time. But, you know, the fossil fuels that we have been dependent on in the past, in terms of a per unit of energy basis, kill anywhere from 17 or 18 to about 40 times as many birds as wind. And there's no question.
It's just not done as spectacularly.
It's not done as spectacularly,
Yeah.
right. Although I rechecked a thing about the Crystal River plant and an inventory they have had of dead birds there. The Canadian government said that the wind farms in Canada were probably killing about 17, 18, 19,000 birds a year 3 years ago. They did that's the whole country, 17 or 18 or 19,000 birds for the whole country per year. They did an inventory of dead birds at Crystal River in 1982, and the estimate was 5,000 birds at one facility in 48 hours.
Huh?
Yeah, migrating birds flying into chimneys.
Okay. Flying into chimneys.
Into chimneys, yeah.
I'll be darned.
And what they did to stop that, I believe, was to put floodlights on the chimneys so the birds could see them at night.
Okay.
But, you know, I mean, there are other ways. The Canadians said that gill fishing nets were a more important killer of birds than wind turbines.
Gill fishing nets.
Yeah.
So they get seabirds.
They get seabirds in gill fishing nets. The seabirds dive looking for fish.
Yeah, they get their neck caught
and they
in
get
that.
caught in the gill fishing nets and drown. They die a lot of ways. And wind is by no means the worst of them. In fact, it is beneficial compared to if it can be used to get rid of some of the others. We have one more item here.
Yes, we do.
And that item is this from Philly.com, Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation. The agency redeveloping the Navy Yard is installing a smart grid system on a 1,200-acre campus in South Philadelphia. PIDC envisions an interconnected network of renewable power sources and storage devices in a self-supporting community microgrid.
So this Navy Yard is operating as its own utility.
Yeah.
They're buying wholesale power and distributing it to their customers, their tenants.
Right.
And what they're doing is they're making some of that power themselves,
Right.
storing some of that power themselves,
Yeah.
and basically creating lower costs for their tenants.
Yeah. And this is not a small community.
It's also not a government operation
Yeah.
anymore. It's not socialism. The Navy Yard is privately owned. Well, it's owned by an industrial development corporation.
But they have big buildings on this thing.
Oh, yeah.
They have skyscrapers on this thing.
Do they skyscrapers?
My understanding was that they had at least one very large building there that was something like 70 stories tall, or I don't remember.
Doesn't show in this picture, but that's okay.
They have
Yeah.
big.
There's 70 individual customers in the Navy Yard development. They did. say
Probably
that.
most of those are industrial.
Some of them is the Navy.
Ah, okay. So
That's
the
a-
Navy,
that's a tenant.
The Navy has been kicked out of its old quarters that it owned, and now it's a
now
tenant.
they rent it.
Good for them. Okay.
And this is probably a big one. I don't know anything about it, but the Acre Philadelphia Shipyard.
Okay.
Shipyards tend to be big.
There used to be a shipbuilding plant about 200 yards from where I lived in Massachusetts, and it also was referred to as the marina, and it was significantly smaller than the marina here on
Oh, yeah?
in Brattleboro.
Smaller?
It was about the size. The whole thing was smaller than the marina. Yeah.
And they built ships?
They at one time.
At one time. Okay.
when 40 tons was a ship.
All right.
Okay. Well, we're at the end of our
Pretty
hour.
close to it, yep.
And so I think what we should do is just say goodbye to everybody. And so we will be, as we have said many times, doing our other show this week. We're going to be doing a show next week. We'll see y'all.
Yeah. Now this time I'm going to raise my right arm. It's kind of, as I said, it's kind of funny looking at a television screen, you know?
and
I don't expect this one to come up with.
Yes,
when I
it's not a
look at
mirror. Okay. See you later, everybody.
it. Alligator.
Alligator.
I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rain